Good morning. This is Chris with Phoenix Gaming. I just wanted to reach out and say happy Black Friday and happy Thanksgiving to all of my American viewers, as I very clearly am one of those Americans. And if you have an analog holiday in Europe, which I have no clue if you do or not, I'm uncultured, happy European holiday to you as well. And so I just wanted to say thank you again to the community. Everybody's been awesome. It's been really supportive. I've grown. I've gotten good feedback. So I just wanted to kind of have a few announcements really quickly. I've had some feedback about changing camera angles on the battle reports just to kind of break up the monotony of the overhead view. That is coming. So if you're one of those people who was like, hey man, could you try something different? Like, I enjoy your playing, but I'm not like enjoying the view. It is coming, but probably not till January. We are working on some different ideas and camera angles, and we're actually trying to see if we can zoom it in so you can see the whole table, but at a closer view. So I've got some ideas going. I've got some things in mind we're going to be testing. Look for those changes in January. In addition to that, my Teespring store is still up and running. There's a link in the description. There's themed merchandise. I will be adding some within the next week or two here. Some D&D themed stuff. So keep your eyes open for that. I've got this video going up to Patreon right now, and then I'll have another deep dive on the orcs. And I'm going to be sitting down and scheduling out some videos. And then for those of you that go to my events, I also wanted to let you know, I plan on running a lot this year. We're going to be doing at least 5 to 6 in Chesterton. And then we're going to be doing 2 to 3 in Plymouth. So I'm going to be breaking my time up. I will not be the only TO anymore at my events. I'm going to have some of the other guys on my team kind of take that mantle and help me out so I get a chance to play. Outside of that, I think those were the main announcements we needed to make. So let's dive into the video. If you are interested in supporting me, obviously there's Patreon. There's a link there. You can subscribe to us on Twitch. I do live stream some of the videos. I also live stream games. So we do some interesting things on Twitch. It's been pretty neat. And again, I'm trying to merge the communities as much as I can rather than having like a Twitch community and a YouTube and blah, 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 blah. So, yeah, if you want to support me, there's a lot of ways you can. If you don't want to watch my videos, that's fine. You can subscribe on Patreon. I am working on getting some new perks taken care of for that, but that's going to be within the next 3 months or so. So, by March, look for that to kind of shake up a little bit. Today we're going to talk about Drukhari, Dark Eldar, Dark Elves, whatever you want to call them. Old heads like me call them Dark Eldar or Dark Elves. The newer players call them Drukhari. This is one of those where Drukhari's kind of stuck with me now that like I've called them that. Guard is still Guard. They'll always just be Guard to me. They're never going to be the Astra Militarum. I don't know why. And then Eldar are just Eldar. You know, they're not Eldari to me. But for whatever reason, Drukhari kind of sticks. And I feel like it's just because it's less syllables. Like I can just be lazier. Drukhari. Yeah, it's actually not. I don't know. It's just easier to say in my brain. We're going to go over the Wych Cults today. Basically, what we're going to do is we're going to go over the Army Detachment Rules, and then we're going to go through the cults. We're going to talk about the cults that I like the most, and then we'll talk about transports, and we might even talk about some of the individual units. I don't know if I'm going to dive too much into it. There's not a lot. So Drukhari's really weird. They're almost 3 separate armies in one book, and each army's kind of small, but then when you can combine them, it makes the codex feel bigger than it is. It's a really neat army. It has some interesting rules. I do like it. We may talk about the secondaries today also. Let's see where we're at by the time I get done with this. The main detachment rules I want to touch on are the raiding forces rules. And every patrol you take is free as long as all you use are patrols, right? And basically all that means is I could take 3 patrols of witches if I wanted to, and they're all free because they're all patrols. I could take a patrol of witches and a patrol of Cabalites, and they're both free. Or the homunculus covens however you want to break it up. You can take 3, 2, 1. It doesn't matter. Your patrols are free as long as all you take are patrols. Each sub-faction does get its rules in its own patrol. So remember when I said there are effectively 3 separate armies? So if you take a patrol of witches, they get all their witch rules. And then if you take a patrol of Cabalites, they get all their Cabalite rules. And if you take a patrol of Homunculi, they get all their Homunculi rules. So you don't break your Battleforged or army bonuses by having 3 different sub-factions, because that's all this lets you do. You can't intra-detachment soup, so I can't take a Homunculus unit in a Cabalite unit, or in a Cabalite patrol, unless it's Ynnari. And in Ynnari you can't take Homunculus anyway, but that doesn't matter. It just lets you know that if you take a patrol of witches, all that can go in there are witch units, or the mercenaries. Blades for hire. There we go. And then in addition to that, you have access to a real space raid. What that is you can take all of your sub-factions in a battalion instead of multiple patrols, right? But you have to have at least 1 Archon, 1 Succubus, 1 Homunculus, and then 1 troop choice from each. Now, the upgraded troop choices do count, because those are troops. So you could take the Blood Brides, and you could take the Trueborn, and then you could take whatever the racks are called, I forget. Or you can just take the base ones. It doesn't matter. So what does being in a real space raid get you? I mean, the main thing it's going to get you is all of your units go in 1 detachment. They all get access to their own specific army bonuses, right? And then in addition to that, the Archon's rerolls affect all core units instead of core Cabalite units. So he loses that Cabalite trigger on his reroll hit rolls of 1, which means he can have Incubi and Scourges reroll 1s because they are core, but they're not Cabal or anything like that. In addition to that, you get access to a stratagem that lets you, for 1 command point, you can take a Warlord trait on all of your HQs because you're in a battalion, rather than having to spend 1 command point per Warlord trait. So if you have a Homunculus and you have a Succubus, you get to take a Warlord trait on all of them. Those are the main things you're going to get from it, because your transports and stuff can carry anything anyway, which we'll kind of get into at a later point. We'll talk about some Drukhari tactics. But these were the main things I wanted to talk about. Today we're going to focus on the Witch Cult. So we're going to start with Power from Pain before we dive into the obsessions. It's just your turn-based bonus for Drukhari. At turn 1, you have a 6-up invulnerable save army-wide. That's the first Power from Pain, which is why in Ynnari, you don't get an invuln on some of your units that would normally get them if you take Drukhari units. Alright? Turn 2, you can advance and charge. Turn 3, you add 1 to the attack's hit roll and melee, and vehicles and monsters don't have a penalty for shooting heavy weapons while they're engaged. So your Raiders or your Ravagers won't take the -1 to hit while they're engaged with heavy weapons starting turn 3. Mantle of Agony, you get a 5-up invulnerable save, and then Emboldened by Bloodshed, you automatically pass morale checks. Okay? So they're really good, actually. Now that we've covered what Power from Pain is, we're going to go into the custom obsessions. We're going to start with Acrobatic Display, consolidate or pile in through other models and terrain. It's okay. There's some play there. You could use it in conjunction with some of these other things, maybe. I'm not a fan of it. Typically, if you don't cripple the units that you're hitting, most of your melee units are evaporating anyway, especially the Witch Cult ones. So I don't know that that's really going to be great outside of on your Show Stealer Succubus, which gets to consolidate 6 inches in any direction. So being able to hop through terrain or models could be very useful. Art of Pain, while engaged, units treat the turn 1 battle round higher for Power from Pain. So that one's interesting. You know, it doesn't really affect much except for turn 2. You get to be turn 3 and add 1 to your hit rolls. And then turn 3, you get to be turn 4 to have a 5-up invuln save. But a lot of your witches have a 4-up in melee. Some of your other units won't. Some of your other units are relying on the power from pain for the invulnerable save, so it's not bad. It's just you'd have to kind of build around it. Berserk Fugue is interesting, and I don't think this one's bad, but it's an all-consuming, which means you can only take this. Other ones, you just pick 2. You get 6's Explode on the charge, or get charged or Heroic Intervention, and you get a 5 up Feel No Pain against mortals. So the 5 up Feel No Pain against mortals, we all know where I stand on that. There's too many mortal wounds in the game if that is a viable army bonus. 6's Explode on charge, though. Witches roll a ton of dice. So having 6's Explode is really good. That doesn't mean there aren't better options. I'm just saying it's pretty good. And again, with certain Succubus builds, you could get a little bonkers. There's ways to swing, I think it's like 10 dice on the charge. And hitting on 2, 6's Explode, and hit rolls of 6 do mortals equal to your damage. We'll kind of get into that build later. But there's some neat layering you could do with that. But again, I don't like a lot of the customs. They're not bad. They're just not great. They're real good if you're just like playing a friendly game to just kind of play around with. But if you're doing something competitive, most of them aren't great. Precise Killers, Blade Artist pops on 5s. That one's not bad, especially in conjunction with the +1 to wound vehicles or monsters, because with your witches and such, you're wounding most of the vehicles and monsters on 5 anyway, so having that extra pip of AP when you wound is pretty good. That would be, if I were going to run a custom, that's probably what I would run, is Precise Killers and Test of Skill. Slashing Impact, 1 enemy unit takes a mortal on a 6 after a charge. You just roll dice, and a 6 is 1 mortal, and you can only do 1 mortal. Stimulant Innovators, once per game, you can roll a D3 on the combat drugs tables and get those effects, which will stack until end of turn. So that one's not bad. I'm not a big fan of once per game army bonuses, but that one's not bad because a D3 is either Shock Assault, you get the bonus attack, +1 strength, or +2 to your move, and they will stack with whatever drugs you have. So even if you had like Adrenalite, which is the Shock Assault one, you'd get 2 extra attacks on the charge. So that one's actually, like I said, like it's not bad, like it's actually kind of good, but the downside is A, it's random, and B, it's once per game. So again, from a competitive perspective, not necessarily the best choice because you're only getting that once per game. Test of Skill, I already mentioned. You get +1 to wound vehicles or monsters. Most of your units in the Obsessions, the Wych Cults, are going to be Strength 3, Strength 4. Some of them will have poison weapons. You might get 1 or 2 that are Strength 5. So having +1 to wound vehicles and monsters is pretty handy. And again, like if I were going to build a semi-competitive list out of this stuff, that's what that one I would probably just automatically take every time. Just because it makes witches a little bit scarier into those things. Trophy Takers, disadvantage on leadership if any models were destroyed in melee. So that one's interesting. And when you layer it with some of the other leadership debuffs that you can get in the army, it could be interesting, and you could really pile it on. There's a Homunculus Coven that has -1 leadership, and then you can even take a Raider and give it a -2 leadership. So if you put that Raider in that Coven, for example, that Raider now has a -3 leadership aura. So you can slap something with -3 leadership and give it disadvantage if you've got witches that have killed it. But that requires a lot of positioning and a lot of effort. And that's not a bad thing. I'm just saying there's some neat things you could do with it, but they're not necessarily the most straightforward ways to play. Agile Hunters is interesting. You get +1 to hit flying units, and then +3 for Hypex instead of +2. Hypex is your extra movement for your combat drugs. And so that could get interesting, especially if you're running Hellions or Reavers. I think Reavers move 18, so if you give them Hypex, they'll move 21. They auto-advance 6. So, turn 2, they can move 27 inches and charge. So they have effectively a board-wide threat range to some degree. So that one's pretty neat. And again, Hellions and Reavers Hellions especially, are probably my favorite units in this codex. And Reavers are pretty solid. And they're some of the better Wych Cult units, but again, there aren't a ton anyway. So now we've covered the custom sessions, we're going to start going through the regular ones. And like I said, we're not doing these in any specific order other than my favorite one is going to be last. We're going to start with Red Grief, Speed of the Kill. Their army bonus, your reroll charge rolls. Man, free rerolls are always good. Especially if you're playing a melee army and you get charge roll rerolls. As an orc player, having Here We Go is good more often than it's a letdown. You know, it has been a letdown before where I've had like ramming speed rolling 3 dice and I charge and I need like a 6 and I fail it with 3 dice and then I Here We Go it and I still fail it. Like that's going to happen occasionally. But having free rerolls is always good. On a melee-centric army, being able to reroll charges is helpful. +2 to advance rolls is also really good for this army. You're talking about an army that has, advance and charge starting turn 2. And, like witches move 7. If you give them Hypex, for example, they'll move 9. And then they're going to minimum advance 3. So turn 2, they can cover minimum 12 inches. If you build them that way. And even if you don't, they're still covering a minimum of 10 inches. But a maximum of 9 plus 7 is 16. So they're going to cover a lot of ground and get into combat. So I don't think their Relic and Warlord trait are super great. I don't think they're bad. I just don't think they're great. But their strat is really neat, and I do like their strat. So their Warlord trait, you have to put on a Succubus, obviously. You get the melee trans hit, which basically means you can only be hit on a natural roll of 4 or higher. It's okay. The downside to that is that the way you play a Succubus, in my opinion, is she's going to have Show Stealer every time. And if she has Show Stealer, she can consolidate 6 inches in any direction. So she's not going to get into melee too often without it being because you want her there. So I feel like that's kind of a wasted Warlord trait when you could give her something that makes her more killy. To me, she's just a torpedo. That's all she is. Their Relic is okay. So there's another Relic that's kind of similar. And I think it's arguably better. It's called the Dancer's Edge. They both fight at strength 5. This one's neg 3. The Dancer's Edge is neg 4. This one's 3 damage. The Edge is 2 damage. But wound rolls of 6 for the Edge. Ignore invulnerable saves. And because she has the Blade Artist ability, it becomes neg 5. So I feel like it's just a little bit better choice. Yeah, you get 3 damage out of this one, but it's still only strength 5. So it is what it is. It's not bad, and there are things you could layer with it to be good, like precise strikes, I think it's called, or precision blows, and that's where your hit rolls of 6 are mortals equal to the damage. So yeah, I mean, there's ways to make it good, and it's not bad. I personally prefer the Dancer's Edge. It does deal damage. Like I said, at strength 5, I think there's just better options out there. And then there's strat. After attacks, but before consolidates, if every model is within 6 inches of a transport, they can get back in, even if they disembarked. So a Witch Cult unit can re-embark in a transport or just embark in a transport if every model is within 6 of the transport. It's really interesting. So oddly, one of my buddies, Alex, he kind of dabbled with Drukhari for a bit, and this was the faction he really liked because of that. So there was a lot of slam your boat into things, right? And then slam your witches into things, and then fight with the witches, and then use the strat to put them back in the boat, and then fight with the boat. And then when your opponent goes to counterswing, the only thing they get to fight is the boat. So it is a neat way to kind of keep your witches on the table. There's other utility for it as well. Like you can obviously do that. If they wipe the unit and you can get them back in the boat, then you have the ability to put the boat back into strategic reserves and all kinds of different things. So there's a lot of utility there. It's a really neat strat that opens the door for a lot of weird combos. Cursed Blade, I actually, so this was the first one I played with, and I do like it. There's a lot of interesting things you can do here. Their army bonus is +1 strength, and their melee saves of 6 do a mortal wound back to the attacker. The +1 strength I like a lot, because you can get your witches up to strength 5 if you take the Grave Lotus combat drug. You can actually give them, I think, Painbringer, and give them +1 toughness, and now you effectively have Space Marine witches. You know, being T4 instead of T3 is a pretty big jump in this game. And then being strength 4 is also really good. So like wounding Chainsword Marines on 4s, for example, and getting wounded on 4s will help your witches stay alive. And then if you just give them strength 5 with the Grave Lotus, now you're just wounding Marines on 3s. So again, like there's a lot of good utility there. That is a good solid bonus. The melee saves of 6 do a mortal wound are interesting. I don't think it's bad. You have to slow roll a lot of your saves, simply because if you've got 10 units and I make you roll 20 saves, you don't get to roll all 20 and then I just take mortals. Like we once your unit's dead, it's dead. Again, it's interesting. And these apply to all the Witch Cult stuff, so there's interesting application there. Your Warlord trait in this one replaces your saves of 6 to saves of 4 do immortal, which again, pretty good. You know, your Succubus is going to have a 4-up invuln in combat, so basically as long as she succeeds her saving throw, you're doing immortal back to units. So that's not a bad one. Again, I just feel like if your Succubus is getting attacked, she's probably dying, unless it's just some chaff unit, but I don't know why somebody would just send a chaff unit into her, because she's probably going to blend it, unless it's like a 30 brick of conscripts or something, you know, or just like a brick of boys. But even if it's a brick of boys, you're probably still dying just because of weight of dice. So it's one of those where, again, I just feel like she's a much better unit to build offensively, and I feel like that doesn't necessarily help her do her role better. The relic is, when she dies, she explodes on a 2-up and does a D3 +3 mortals to the attacking unit. That's funny. I don't think it's like amazing or game breaking, but it is hilarious, and I could see that being pretty solid. And the fact that it's the relic is better than the Warlord trait, because the relics are good, but there's just good base weapon options for them as well. You know, just the regular glaive is solid for them. They don't need the upgraded glaive in order to be good. Or even just a power sword would be alright on her. So again, like I personally I wouldn't take it, but I could see the justification for it if somebody were to be like, hey, I'm going to do this, and then if she dies, too bad for you. You know, on a 2-up, you're just taking a bunch of mortal wounds. Their strat is funny. It's interesting. It's not good. It's way too situational to be good. It's kind of like a throwaway. Like, if you get to use it, awesome. If you don't get to use it, oh well. And that's basically whenever you Overwatch. It's an extra Overwatch, because when you use it, you get to shoot Overwatch. So you don't have to use the Overwatch strat. But 5 of your witch models can throw grenades, which are D6 shots, strength 4, neg 1. But they become poison 2. So you get, 5 D6 shots, which is going to be on average like 15, 16 shots. I forget what the actual average is, but it's right there, 15, 16. So you can get that. They are hitting on 6s, but if they hit, they're going to wound anything that isn't a vehicle on 2s. It's like I said, it's funny. I don't think it's really good. There are situations where it could be good, but that's the problem with it, is that it's situational. This was my second favorite cult. I don't think it's necessarily the best in terms of competitiveness, but it is my second favorite cult, and I feel like that strength buff on the witches is pretty solid. And we're gonna finish up with my favorite. And anybody that knows me isn't going to really be surprised, because they're going to see the army bonus and be like, yeah, okay, that makes sense. Units within engagement range at the start of the fight phase, fight first. So, fight first is an extremely powerful ability if you know how to manipulate it and use it. It's why I liked Yanari a lot, It's one of the reasons why I don't play them and never really did, but I liked Emperor's Children a lot. Anything that lets you fight first when you're playing melee-centric armies is really good, because you don't have to waste command points to interrupt. Your opponent will have to waste command points every turn to interrupt if he wants or she wants to interact in a specific way. And it takes some of the pressure off of your army, especially an army like this where everything just dies. So in addition to that, if you charge an enemy unit that isn't engaged with one of your units, you add one of the charge rolls. So this is also really good. All right, we've got 8-inch deep strike charges potentially, as long as there's nothing else in engagement range. You've got, again, the fight first. Like, it's just a good combo for somebody who plays the game the way I like to play the game. The Warlord trait is pretty solid. Hit rolls of 6 are 2 additional hits in melee. I don't see anything wrong with that. There's some pretty silly combos you could get going in there. The Relic, gain a random combat drug. Every battle round, you roll a d6 and gain a random combat drug. I wouldn't waste the Relic on that. I'd just give her the Triptych Whip or the the Dancer's Edge to go with that Warlord trait. Their strat is fight or shoot twice with a unit. The shoot twice you're probably never going to do, just because like Witch Cult shooting is not great. Unless you're only running Witch Cult, then you might. But the fighting, if your witches don't get obliterated and get to fight twice, or your succubus, so think about it this way. If you've got a show steal or succubus, because it is just Witch Cult unit, it's not, or Cult of Strife unit, it's not core. If your succubus gets to fight twice, right? If she charged, she can pile in and consolidate, right? Pile in, make her attacks, consolidate outside of engagement range of the unit she charged. And then because she's charged, she's still eligible to be declared as an attacker. So you could use that strat on her to get back in there, fight again, and then consolidate again. So if you don't kill the unit the first time you hit it, you can jump in, make your attacks, jump out, use the strat, jump in, make your attacks, jump out again. And most of the time, whatever she hits is either going to be really crippled at that point or just dead. Depends on your build. But that is really good with the succubus. Everything else it's kind of meh with, just because everything else just kind of evaporates to a stiff breeze. Alright, so we're going to now go over some of the Witch Cult builds that I like. I haven't explored all of them. These were just the first couple that I really were like, oh, these look fun. And the first one is going to be the Triptych Succubus. And so first of all, if you have a succubus, you just always make her a show stealer. Being able to consolidate 6 inches in any direction is so good, and it will keep her alive. The Triptych Whip is strength user, -3, 2 damage, but it's poison 2 and gives you 3 additional attacks. So she has 9 attacks on her data sheet. 6 attacks on her data sheet, sorry. Plus 3 for this, and then I usually give her Adrenalite, which is the shock assault combat drug. So on the charge, she's rolling 10 dice, right? And then I give her precision blows where hit rolls of 6 do mortals equal to damage and the sequence ends. And I just roll a bucket of dice. I'm just like, here's 10 dice. On average, I'm going to get 1 or 2 6s. So I'm going to do 2 to 4 mortal wounds. It is poison 2, so unless it's a vehicle, you're wounding it on 2s. But she can get access to the strat where her poison weapons work on vehicles. So if you need to, you can run in with 10 dice and just swing them at whatever, neg 3, 2 damage, and just be like, okay, hit rolls a 6, just do mortals, and then after I swing, I can bounce out, right? And then if I want to, and it didn't die, I can then bounce back in, swing again, and then bounce out. So it's a pretty silly combo if you layer everything right. It does require some command point management. With Strife giving her fight first, she's going to be a little bit more survivable simply because one of 2 things is going to happen. Your opponent, if they do get locked into combat with her for whatever reason, is either going to have to interrupt to try to kill her, or you're going to be able to just like smack whatever they hit into her. Like if they charge you, you're going to be able to smack it and then bounce out. And then with a 6-inch consolidate, you're going to be able to take it outside of that 3-inch pile-in range and keep her safe. And yeah, so that is one of my favorite. And this is the one that I'm going to start playing with just to kind of do something else. And that's basically the Dancer's Edge I was talking about. You always give her Show Stealer, so she's Strength 5, Neg 4, 2 damage, wound rolls of 6, ignore invulns, and are an additional AP, so they go to Neg 5. Good Warlord traits to stack with this. Quicksilver Fighter gives you plus 2 attacks for a total of 8. With Adrenalite, you can get 9 on the charge, or Grave Lotus to make it Strength 6. Either one of those is a good option. Blood Dancer, hits of 6 explode. So with Adrenalite, you get 7 attacks on the charge, hitting on 2s, 6s explode. And actually, it explodes twice, which I didn't account for when I made this slide. They explode twice, because Blood Dancer is the Warlord trait for Cult of Strife. So when you're exploding twice with that many dice, you're going to get over 100% hit rate most of the time, you know. And you can also take the Quicksilver Fighter in the custom, and that just gives you single 6s explode on the charge for the Berserk one. And that's just bonus attacks. Again, you're basically just getting a less good version of the Blood Dancer at that point. But yeah, that's, if it were me, I would give it Blood Dancer and Dancer's Edge. You know, I like that combo. I like getting the extra dice. I like the 6s explode twice. It's pretty solid. When it comes to your Raiders or Venoms, your transports, all right, obviously, like in Cursed Blade, they get interesting because they come Strength 8, which means your transports are just wounding things on 2s, like Marines. And in Strife, they get fights first. And they're not terrible in melee if you take the upgrades. The downside is that Armor of Contempt really kind of poo-poos them because they're neg 1. They are neg 2 on wound rolls of 6, but that definitely hurts them into any kind of power armor. It's just like, yeah, all right. They tend to be better, in my opinion, with the Coven or the Cabal bonuses. And that's simply because your Coven bonuses, like if you take the -1 leadership, you can get neg 3 leadership off your boat. You know, you can give it Ramshackle if you take the custom. So there's just some interesting things you can do with that. And then the Cabal bonus, it's going to depend on the Cabal. We'll do a separate video on Cabal later. But really, like, what is it? Blackheart, where you are just always one turn higher. So turn 1, these can advance and charge is really good. I like Poison Tongue, which again we'll get into, but it makes Venoms really interesting because you can put 2 Splinter Cannons on them, and then the Venoms are basically wounding most of the game on 3s, so those aren't bad. So they just kind of tend to synergize, in my opinion, a little bit better with some of the Cabal or some of the Coven bonuses than they do with the Witch Cults. But if you're playing Mono Witch Cult, they're going to be fine. Like, they still get the army bonus and access to any of the strats and stuff that you would normally have access to. So they're not bad. I just think they're better in other situations. You know, they're just better with other bonuses. That's going to wrap up our talk about the Witch Cults. You know, like I said, Strife is where I kind of gravitated towards. I do like the fight first mechanic. It's really good. I've actually got a list that I'm going to be testing out today. I'm probably going to run 3 games with it total, and then next week we're going to be doing our Death Dread video, and then we're going to do a kind of a list review video on this to kind of let everybody know what I felt like worked, what didn't work, stuff like that. And yeah, that's it. So again, Patreon, we got $1.50 hatchlings. You know, we've got the $5 Firebirds, Phoenix $10, Immortals $20. We get to shout out a new Immortal today, which is awesome. Big thank you. You guys have been amazing. Captain Too Tall, the real Donnie G, and welcome Lord Wellingstone to the Hall of Immortals. You will be going up on the website this week as well. You guys are awesome. I appreciate you. And as before, links are in the description, but here they are up there. Watch us on Twitch. We do some cool stuff. I mean, it's a lot of just like battle reports, live streaming games, and we're not like I'm not gonna confuse myself. Like, I'm not out here saying I'm gonna top table literally every tournament I go to or anything, but we are generally pretty competitive players and we do well. when we do go to tournaments and stuff. So it might be worth, if you're just a regular dude or lady that likes competitive tournament play, this is probably the channel for you. If you're one of those people who has to hop from meta to meta so that you can always just be top dog, we're not the channel for you, because it's not how we interact with the game. But if you are somebody who likes competitive play and wants to learn a little bit more about different armies, our Twitch and the YouTube is exactly what you want. Patreon, patreon.com/Phoenixgaming.space. And then obviously you can find us on Facebook and the Teespring store. It's got my old URL. I can't change it, so it's going to be vorpal-gaming.creator-spring.com. Again, link in the description. Thanks a lot for listening.